said earlier, I'm so glad that we are here together because although last week was wonderful to worship with 2 other churches and to actually be reminded that there's many different ways and different styles and different things that people do to worship God, that we serve the same God. And that is beautiful and wonderful. And yet I have to say that as rich as those experiences are, there is something that is comforting to being able to come home, right? To be in your own space, to essentially be with your own family. It's kind of like when you go and you attend a big family reunion and all the connections are super meaningful. They're all wonderful, but there is a peace to coming back to the familiar faces and the everyday rhythm that comes with that and the shared life. And again, also, since it's only been 1 week, there's been a lot that unfolded, right? There have been many of us who have been away, who went to holidays. There have been adventures. I know that Alona and Max went on a plane ride over the city. I watched your video and thought it was wonderful. And then there's been people who have had to deal with things that were unexpected, that were challenging, and that were difficult. And as a church family, we've had to grieve someone that we loved. See, because life just doesn't pause. It doesn't stop. It just keeps coming. Sometimes there's joy, and sometimes there's sorrow. In our own family, I know many of you had seen because you're connected with me on Facebook. But a week and a half ago, we'd got the phone call from the cardiologist explaining to us that after all the months of testing, that Kellen is definitely at the early stages of congestive heart failure, and that that they had explored all the possibilities of any surgical fixes that could be done that might alleviate things, and that they had believed that they were now exhausted, and so they would be referring him to the transplant team. And so with that, we would begin a bunch of medications, and we would need to begin the process. And all of that is heavy, and it is scary. It is a new direction. Now I want to be clear. We believe passionately in miracles. I have watched them over and over and over again in his life. With that, I want to acknowledge the fact that we know that Kellen has a half a heart, essentially. That is what he is working with. And that heart is getting tired. And that's not bad. That's not evil. Thank God there are medical things that are out there to make the world so much better. Because, see, God brings healing and mercy. Sometimes he does it incredibly and in ways that we cannot explain. And then sometimes he does it through medical professionals. And the whole time we hold on to that hope. And so with that, we started a whole bunch of medications. One of the things that has changed, just as we got the news about the failure, his numbers that we've been watching had slipped decisively into failure. And so we started a new medication, and on Friday we did more blood work, and it has brought those numbers down. It doesn't change the fact that he's still in failure, right? The medication is what's controlling it. However, anyone who's seen him today will note that he is in a much better temperament. He's been kind of cantankerous for a number of months, and he is happy and has been for like the last week. Enough so that I will share a happy story. My youngest hates geese, like with a deep passion. And this week, in feeling better, Kellen was happily joking around and teasing with Joe, because someone had mentioned something about geese. And all of a sudden, Kellen is walking around the living room, and he's going like this, and he's like, honk, 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 and following around Joe. And Joe is like, that's it. Like, you need to leave me alone, right? But it is an incredible joy that I will take. And so we'll continue to pray, because there's going to be things the whole way along that are going to require prayer. And sometimes when I'm praying and when we pray with persistence, right? Sometimes it can feel almost like a little bit of holy harassment. But I think that Jesus encouraged that kind of bold faith, right? In Luke 11, 5 through 10, it's been a passage that I cling to, actually, ever since Kellen was born. And it's about that persistence. It's about asking, seeking, and knocking, even when the hour is late and it feels like the door is shut. And so it says in 5, and he said to them, suppose one of you has a friend, and you go to him at midnight and say to him, friend, lend me 3 loaves of bread, for a friend of mine has arrived, and I have nothing set before him. And he answers from within, do not bother me. The door has already been locked, and my children are in bed, and I cannot get up and give you anything. And I tell you, even though he will not get up and give anything out of friendship, at least because of his persistence, he will get up and give him whatever he needs. And so I say to you, ask and it shall be given to you. Search and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened for you. Everyone knows, everyone who asks receives, and everyone who searches finds, and everyone who knocks, the door will be opened. See, Jesus tells the story of a man knocking on the friend's door late at night, and it's awkward, and it's ill-timed, inconvenient, and he just keeps knocking. In another Bible translation, it says that he just won't go away, right? And stuff. And it's because of his persistence that the door has opened. And that's what we need to be doing. We must be asking and seeking and knocking, and not because we're naive about the storm, but because we know who holds the door. And we trust that God hears and he is going to answer. Right? That's right. But I'm going to be honest, when the storm hits, it doesn't actually come easy. Right? And maybe you felt that too. That's why when I was invited to speak to a group of women in Nigeria last week, one topic that stood out to me immediately, and it was our identity in Christ. Because in a world full of storms, violence, fear, loss, and uncertainty, what anchors us is knowing exactly who we are in relation to him. And so, as I prepared to speak to these women, I had, of course, tried to do some due diligence. I went through and I was reading about things in their country and where they were. And, I knew things were different. But in Nigeria, 35% of women face gender-based violence before they are 15. Which is horrifying. So 35% of women will have been abused, assaulted, or sex trafficked before they are 15. The country is also facing intense food insecurity right now because of flooding and then droughts and then pests that are destroying all of their crops. And so as I thought about that, I realized to myself that if I'm going to talk about identity, they do not need platitudes. They do not need me to just tell them that God just loves them. They need me to also remind them that God is still present in this moment, that he has not abandoned them, and that because of who they are in him, that they are going to face this storm. The storm is not necessarily going away. They need to know that they are not defined by the pain and sacrifice, but by the God who made them. But as I continued to prepare, I couldn't help shaking that we all need that reminder. Because our storms may look different from place to place. And perhaps it's not the violence, but maybe there is other loss. Maybe there are politics that make us anxious. Maybe there are things that are inducing fear. Maybe, like myself, there are medical diagnoses. Either way, there is uncertainty that faces all of us. And whatever they are, they threaten to shake us. And it's in those moments that we must know what anchors us is not just knowing who we are, but who we are in relation to who God is. And we must recognize his glory and his majesty, that he is the creator, the Lord of the universe, and yet he calls us his own. He is the one who empowers us, who places gifts and strength to weather the storm, that he is within us. The truth, that identity, it grounds me when the storm rages on. And I hope that it will do that for you too. See, because before we understand who we are, we must understand who he is. So who is God, this God that we belong to, right? In Genesis 1:27, it says that he is the creator. It reminds us that he made us in his image intentionally, beautifully, purposefully, and even now he is still shaping and restoring us. And in Romans 8:15, it says, he is Father. Tells us that we have been adopted, not tolerated, not abandoned. We cry, Abba, and a word of intimacy and trust. In Hebrews 13:8, it proclaims that he is steadfast, that Jesus is the same today as he was yesterday, as he will be forever, and that his love does not shift with the seasons of life. So before we ask, who am I, we must ask who God is. Because when we see his glory and his kindness, his unshakable love, only then do we understand who we truly are. And that brings us to the story that I want to go through. One that happens on a road after the crucifixion, when everything felt lost. So in Luke 24, it tells the story of two disciples who are walking on a dusty road to Emmaus. They're overwhelmed and disorientated by grief. They had hoped that Jesus would redeem Israel, but hope to them had died on the cross. And yet Jesus is walking with them, and they don't recognize him. And I wonder how often that happens to us too, right? We're staggering under the disappointment, and we're wondering who we are now when life looks nothing like we expect. But Jesus meets us right there. And he walks with us, and he listens, and then he reminds us of the bigger story of who he is, who we are in that light. And so in Luke 24:13 to 21, it says, "Now on the same day that two of them were going to the village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened, while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, 'What are you discussing with each other while you walk?' And they stood still, looking sad. And then one said, 'Whose name was Cleopas?' Answered him, 'Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?'" I wonder how many times you've said that too. Not necessarily like here in Nazareth, but in your own life, when you felt the nudge from God. How many times have you been like, seriously, are you not even paying attention to what is happening in my life right now? Could you maybe just seriously? Anyways, right? And then he asked them, "What things?" And they are way nicer than I would be at this point. And they replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was the prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed them over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he would be the one to redeem Israel. Yes. And besides all of this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place." There are so many times in my life where I am like these two, where God is with me, but I am circling the drain of overwhelm, where it feels like it has all gone wrong, where nothing is going the way that I thought it would. Maybe it's a relationship that we longed for to be restored, and it didn't heal. And we wonder if we're still lovable or worth fighting for. Maybe the child that we've raised is walking a path that we never imagined for them. And we question if maybe we failed or if we are still a good parent. Maybe that diagnosis has come, and with it, the fear that our body has betrayed us. We're faced with exactly how fragile our body is. Or the job has ended, and now we're unsure of our value, our purpose, and our place. All the hope we carried seems to have quietly slipped through our fingers. And we are left asking, who am I now? The storms of life hit, and all our hopes feel dashed. And it is in that swirl of disappointment and disorientation that we can forget who we are. In Luke 24, the 2 disciples are walking with this exact road. Their hopes have been nailed up on that cross, and they're buried in the tomb. They've heard the whispers, the testimonies from the woman who had gone to the tomb and seen the angels claiming that Jesus was alive, but they couldn't quite believe it. In verse 24, it goes on to say, "Some of those who were with us went to the tomb, and they found it just as the woman had said, but they didn't see him." They had evidence, but not the eyes to see. And that's us too, far too often. We've heard the stories from the others around us who have testified, like this morning, like throughout our life. People who have journeyed perhaps a little bit further, who have hope, who are there saying to us, "He is alive, he is with us, he's still working. Don't give up hope." And yet we still feel stuck in the fog of our own loss because we can't see him. Not yet. And yet it is here with his grace that Jesus joins us on the road, and he walks with us even in our doubt. He listens and teaches, and he reminds us of God's greater story. And eventually, our eyes will open. Because whether it is just Jesus speaking to us through the Spirit, or whether it's through other people, he nudges us out of our confusion to remind us. Now I have to say that if I was Jesus in that moment, I would have been impatient as well, right? I would be thinking, seriously, how many times do I have to explain this to you? Have you not been paying attention? I know that I would have been sarcastic. I know it. I am not Jesus. And I would have been short. But Jesus meets them with patience and kindness. Right? When we read in Luke, when we read a little bit further, he calls them foolish and slow of heart. But it's not angry or harsh. It's gentle, with the correction of someone who loves deeply and longs to restore our understanding. I think of when you're with your children and they do something that is just ridiculous. My son has his head down. He's like, nope, right? But there are those times when you're looking at them and you're like, seriously, I love you. I know you are smarter than this. So, like, come on now. I know, right? And it's chiding. It's not meant to shame them. It's just, I know you are. But Jesus just stays there and he walks with them. And in verse 27, it says, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, and he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. See, Jesus meets them and he gives them a bit of a Bible study on the road. He helps reorientate their understanding. And in doing so, he reawakens their hope. Slowly, he begins to restore their identity. Because, see, we will forget and we are going to doubt. And we lose ourselves in that grief, but he doesn't walk away. He just keeps walking right with us. He's patient and he reminds us of the bigger story. And then the moment comes. There's a moment for a choice. In verse 28, it says, as they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he was going to go on. See, Jesus isn't going to force himself in. That's not what he does. He walks with us, and he'll speak through the Spirit, and he'll remind us of the scriptures, whether through Spirit or through someone else. And then he gives us space to respond. Will we invite him closer, even when our hearts are aching with disappointment? Will we ask him to stay close, even when everything feels lost? These two disciples, they had a choice. And they chose to lean in. Because in verse 29 it says, they urged him strongly, stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now nearly done. See, they didn't have the full picture like many of us. They were right in the middle of the challenge. They didn't recognize that Jesus was with them. And you and I are often blind there. But there was something that was stirring in their hearts, enough to say, don't leave. Please stay. And Jesus did. He went in to stay with them. And this is where the transformation begins, when we invite Jesus in. So Jesus stays and he makes himself comfortable. And it is at the table where everything changes. Oh, I didn't give these ones to you, Connor. So in 30 and 31, when he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and he gave it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. It wasn't on the road during the teaching that their eyes were opened. It was at the table, in the breaking of bread, in the familiarity of grace that they saw him. And when they saw him clearly, they remembered who they were. This is what communion is. It's not just a ritual, but an invitation. It's a moment where we bring our brokenness and our questions. And Jesus meets us there again. Takes the bread and he blesses it, and he breaks it, and he gives it to us. And in doing that, he reminds us that you are still mine. You are still loved. You are still called. I remember one day being so worn out when Kellen was in hospital. We had been there for months, and he, as an infant, was struggling with congestive heart failure. He was going in and out, and every day felt like defeat. And somewhere deep down, I felt like there was the beginning of a shift. Now, we had a cardiologist who would come in. He was the most negative man in the world. He would walk in. Most of the time, he would not even look at Kellen before he slumped into the chair, and he would say something like, "Sure, he looks terrible. I don't really know that there's much more that we can do." His name was Dr. Dick, and I have to tell you, I don't know that he needed to live up to the name, but he was a lot. And it was heavy, and every day he would come in and he would just tell me these awful things. And then after, the cardiothoracic surgeon, Dr. Rebecca, would walk in, and he would look Kellen over, and he would listen to me. And then he said something that I would never forget. He turned to his group of students, and he said, "Moms know better than we do. And you need to listen to Mom. Even if it looks like things are going wrong, Mom has seen something, and we need to listen to her." In that moment, it was small, and it was tiny, and it was ordinary. But it was so human. And that is like Jesus breaking the bread at the table. It was the recognition and reassurance of what he was saying. I've been with you all along. And sometimes we don't see him when we are exhausted and full of emotion. But then a word was spoken, and a moment shifts, and our eyes open, and we realize that he's been right there walking with us. He's been listening, and he's been comforting and steadying us. And when we see him rightly, something shifts in us. In verse 32, it says, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking on the road? While he was opening the scriptures for us?" See, in the darkness, wasn't there something? There had to be something. Otherwise, why the invitation for him to stay? And their despair gives way to purpose. Their sadness turns to urgency. The disciples don't even finish dinner. They run back to Jerusalem in the dark to tell all the others, it's true, he's alive. And it's in that encounter that their identity is restored. They're not confused followers wandering away. Now they're witnesses of the resurrection. They're witnesses of the goodness. Now they are on a mission.